I'm from the crisis world. You're from the hostage world. I pursued you because you had extraordinary experience and knowledge that our domain needed. What we have talked a little bit about in the green room and during the course of our relationship is while hostage events seem to grab the most visibility, the majority of the events in which the skills and the tools of these programs that you've run have been used are for non-hostage events. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think back in '73 when Frank and Harvey started their program, they were almost exclusively focused on hostage situations.
That's the name. Yeah.
Someone holds someone and threatens them to seek fulfillment of a demand. A demand, according to the dictionary, is the essential ingredient in there being a hostage situation. So the FBI started its program the following year. They started in '73. We started in '74, I believe, doing formal training. And again, we adopted the hostage model. When we revamped the FBI program years later, and I created the first unit, we called it purposely the Crisis Negotiation Unit. And we did that based on all the information we had gathered, statistically supported, that hostage situations comprise only about 10% or less of what we do. They're fairly infrequent. What we do is crisis intervention.
Yes.
And the most common call out for police negotiators are suicides, by far. You can talk to experienced negotiators, 10, 15, 20 years, who've never worked a hostage situation, but they've worked, countless barricade suicide situations. And that's really important to know. And that's why I think the major shift, other than the development of the program by NYPD, was in 1990 when we in the FBI shifted to a crisis intervention model and began to teach active listening skills. Because we're basically dealing with people who are having the worst day of their life. They're in a crisis. They're not there. You say, "Oh, you want to commit suicide? How about I trade you a hamburger for you coming out?"
Right,
That's
or a
not
cigarette, yeah.
it's quid pro quo bargaining. That's
Right.
not what it's about.
Right.
So you have to assume there's other issues, things going on. So we have to use a different approach. If people don't need you for something and they don't want anything from you, it makes it quite challenging to exert influence over their behavior. So what we have to do is gain that influence through creating a relationship of trust and respect.
Yeah.
So in New York City, we had still do, three different types of response protocols. With one of those response protocols having two subsets. So there's the hostage situations, as Gary pointed out, which is a much smaller number. They're about 10% of the responses. The second category, which has the two subsets, are the barricaded individual, those that are by themselves. And that where it comes into two subsets, the first category of the barricade is the barricaded perpetrator, criminal who is wanted by the police, that the detective's knock on the door to arrest him with an arrest warrant. I'm not coming out. I'm not going back to jail. I'll shoot it out with the cops before I go back to jail. Okay, enter the hostage negotiator. We're going to talk to you. The second subset or category of the barricades are the mentally ill or emotionally disturbed, who are now acting out in a manner where they are no longer responsible for themselves,
Right.
and they need an intervention. So we'll enter again the hostage negotiator. And then the third category of response, or as you just mentioned, Gary, are the suicides. Suicide on a bridge, on the girder of a bridge, on the top of a rooftop. And if they're still standing when we arrive, it's automatically telling us two things. The first thing it's telling us that there's a part of them who wants to die today. They're standing on the girder of a bridge or the top of a rooftop. And the second thing it tells us at the same exact time, there's a part of them that wants to live today.
You bet.
They're standing on the girder of a bridge or on the top of a
Classic ambivalence, yeah. And
They didn't jump yet. Yeah.
For us, comparing us to a salesman, that's our foot in the door. That's our entryway into trying to help them find something to live for.
Yeah.
The other thing I tell when I teach around the country, like when I used to teach more, and you teach still, Jack, quite a bit, police officers would say, well, we don't have any of those big-time hostage situations here. We only have suicides. And I would say, in reality, hostage situations are pretty easy. The person is there to get their demands fulfilled, not to die. I won't say they won't die. There's not loss of life, but that's not their primary
function,
objective.
right.
They need to hold the hostage to compel a third party, police or otherwise, to get them what they can't get on their own.
Right.
So in that, there's a recipe to come to a solution. When they realize they feel empowered, I'm going to threaten this hostage. I can make you do whatever I want. And then when we stall for time, good name for a book, when we slow it down, we make them work for everything they get. They slowly come to the realization they're not as powerful as they thought. They're not in as control as they thought. And now they're more receptive to, okay, it's either cooperate with the police or run the risk of being seriously injured or killed. And for us, in hostage situations, they almost always make the right decision. Contrasting that with suicides, as Jack and I were talking earlier, there's some police officers who've done dozens and dozens, and they've been fine. But if you do enough suicides, if you respond to enough of them, someone in that state of ambivalence is going to go ahead and kill themselves.
Yeah.
And it's not because of something you did or did not do.
That's right.
It's a decision they made.
That's right.
And it's also perhaps a topic for a different discussion, but it is the thing that has the most impact on negotiators because we tend to blame ourselves for
Kevin
the loss
Briggs
of a
is our
suicide.
friend. We know him. We know his story. Kevin carries an extraordinary
Amazing man, yeah.
of trauma from, literally hundreds of those on the bridge he had to do. And he loves both of you so much, and
thank you,
and he
And
knows we're
also-
here together doing this.
Now, to Gary's point, if someone is determined to do it, they're going to do it.
That's right.
And there's a story that comes out of New Jersey from a negotiator. I got the story from a class I did a couple of years back, where there was happened to be a female negotiator negotiating with this individual, barricaded by himself, had a gun, and he starts yelling at her, "You shut the
Yeah.
and if you say one more word, I'm going to blow my brains out." And she says, "Okay." And he blew his brains out. Because she said one more word. So he was determined to do this. He was just looking for an excuse.
Yeah.
And she gave it to him. She was devastated by that.
I know.
When it's a jewelry store robbery, a convenience store robbery, a bank robbery, and loss of life is fairly rare in those, but when there is a loss of life, we all know who to blame. Mr. Bad Guy, who's engaged in bad activity and whatever. But when it's a suicide, it's not always some desperado. It's, a nice lady whose husband's left her. It's an old man whose family's abandoned him or he doesn't have a family left. It's a girl that didn't get a date to the prom. Who knows what it is? And these are good people. I remember I taught a school in Alaska back in the 90s, and, the whole audience is in there, and all these beepers go off in the front row, and all these Alaska state troopers, gone. They come in the next morning, and I say, "Well, I think you probably have a story to share."
Yeah.
And they did. And they get called outside of town in Anchorage, and there was a middle-aged lady whose husband had left her. Her kids didn't live anywhere around her. She had no family support. And she was sitting on her front stoop with a gun to her head, and she was going to blow her brains out. And these cops were just getting trained as negotiators, so they said to me, "We did that active listening shit. That shit works." and you could see the smiles in their face.
I love it.
Because she was such a nice woman. We all felt so sorry for her.
Yeah.
She'd been dealt a bad hand by this jerk of a husband. And, it was an emotional event for them, but they had now been recently armed with the skills where they could, instead of, "Ma'am, put your gun down and come over here," it's, "Can you tell me what happened? I want to hear more about this, and it must have made you feel terrible," and all this kind of stuff. They identified with her, and they became human beings, and they saved her life. Now, statistically, she may never try that again. It's a great feeling that is often overlooked.
You bet it is.
The outside critic would say, "Oh, well, she probably didn't really mean to do it." Yeah, really?
Yeah.
It looks real easy till you do it, but you have to invest the time and effort. But those suicides are particularly tough, as the story that Jack just mentioned.
I was a partner that was telling the story. He mentioned it in the class. I asked him, like you do, "Would you mind telling the story?" And he did, for training purposes and learning. And she wound up leaving the team. It impacted on her so greatly as a result of that.